The Green Beret who embarked on a solo rampage, Roy Benavidez. During the Vietnam War, Roy Benavidez's existence had been defined by hardship. As a young boy, his life was rough. He lost both parents and faced relentless bullying from his classmates due to his mixed Yaqui Indian and Mexican ancestry. Financial necessity forced him to abandon his education in the 8th grade to support his kin. By the age of 19, Benavidez had enlisted in the Army, serving during the Korean War within the Texas Army National Guard. In 1959, he wed Hilaria Lala Coy Benavidez. He later finished his airborne training, becoming assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division. In 1966, Sergeant Roy Benavidez found himself in a hospital bed after detonating a landmine. Medical professionals declared he would never walk again. He had originally been deployed to Vietnam in 1965, acting as an advisor for the ARVN forces stationed there. Benavidez was conducting a solitary, classified operation to gather proof that North Vietnamese regulars were masquerading as Viet Cong. While he was on patrol along a narrow path disguised as a local guerrilla, he struck the mine. Sometime later, a squad of Marines stumbled upon Benavidez. They initially suspected he was a booby trap, but they were stunned when they flipped him over and discovered the man dressed in Viet Cong pajamas was actually Hispanic and wearing U.S. Army dog tags. He was soon evacuated to a hospital in the United States. 2 months into his recovery, Benavidez regained consciousness and his memories returned to him. The doctor reiterated the grim prognosis. He would never walk again because his spine had been shattered and his brain had been severely jarred in his skull. Nevertheless, Benavidez, confined to his wheelchair, pleaded with the doctors not to discharge him from the Army. The military was his entire life. Driven by sheer determination, Benavidez rose from his bed night after night, dragging his body to the wall and forcing weight onto his legs. For weeks, he pushed through the agonizing pain, gradually increasing his distance, which took the doctors by surprise. 6 months later, supported by his wife Lala, Roy Benavidez walked out of the hospital doors. He was initially promised only a desk assignment at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. However, through relentless daily exercise and vigorous training, he qualified for the Special Forces, also known as the Green Berets. He would be assigned to Detachment B-56, 5th Special Forces Group, Airborne, 1st Special Forces. Now the year was 1968. Staff Sergeant Roy Benavidez, operating under the call sign Tango Mike Mike, was back in the Vietnamese theater. While off duty and attending a church service, his focus was pulled toward the frantic radio transmissions coming from the front lines in Loc Ninh, Vietnam, near the Cambodian border. A 12-man Special Forces reconnaissance team, which included his close comrades Sergeant First Class Leroy Wright, Staff Sergeant Lloyd Frenchy Mousseau, Specialist 4 Brian O'Connor, and 9 Montagnard tribesmen who were part of the Civilian Irregular Defense Group Program, or CIDG, was encircled by a North Vietnamese battalion numbering 1,000 battle-hardened soldiers. Every member of the unit had been either wounded or killed in the earlier skirmishes. 3 of the helicopters dispatched to rescue them had been unable to extract the team due to overwhelming enemy fire. When those aircraft returned, they were riddled with bullet holes. One of the door gunners, 19-year-old Michael Craig, had been struck several times and died in Benavidez's arms. There was no way Benavidez was going to abandon his friends in that jungle. He leaped onto a returning helicopter that was heading back in, volunteering so impulsively that he did not have time to grab his M16. Consequently, he was armed only with a Bowie knife and medical supplies. Benavidez later described the experience as entering a state of autopilot. As they neared the extraction zone, Benavidez realized his fellow team members were too severely incapacitated to run the distance to the helicopter. The enemy gunfire was so intense that the pilot, Larry McKibben, had to zigzag the craft in an attempt to dodge it. Yet he was still able to provide some covering fire. Benavidez jumped out clutching a medic bag and sprinted through the jungle toward the wounded men under a hail of bullets. He took a shot to the leg, which he initially mistook for a scratch from a thorn bush. He first encountered a soldier pinned against a tree whose eyeball had been shot out and was hanging down his cheek. Yet the man was determined to keep firing back. The CIDG troops were lying in a pool of blood. Benavidez patched them up as best he could. He dragged everyone into a defensible position to direct their fire at the enemy and administered morphine to the wounded. He then spotted O'Connor and a CIDG interpreter, signaling them to move toward him, but the gunfire intensified, forcing them to take cover. Another round struck Benavidez in the thigh. Fueled by adrenaline, he deployed green smoke from McKibben in the rescue helicopter to pick them up. While everyone who could move boarded the chopper, Benavidez suppressed the tree line using an AK-47 he had scavenged to cover O'Connor and the interpreter as they crawled toward the aircraft. Now Benavidez went searching for the team leader, Sergeant First Class Leroy Wright, who had been killed and who also possessed classified intelligence that could not be allowed to fall into enemy hands. Benavidez located his body and proceeded to drag him toward the chopper. He was shot again, this time in the stomach, and hit in the back by shrapnel from a nearby grenade, which knocked him unconscious. When he came to, Benavidez was forced to leave his fallen friend's remains behind. Disaster had also struck. The rescue helicopter had crashed to the ground from enemy fire. The pilot, McKibben, was dead. 5 of the men on board, including Mousseau, survived the crash, as did O'Connor and the interpreter who had not yet entered the helicopter. Benavidez pulled the survivors from the wreckage, distributed morphine, and established a perimeter around the crash site. He called in heavy air support from F-100s overhead, which dropped napalm on the enemy positions. When the jets ran low on fuel and had to depart, the enemy machine gun fire resumed. Benavidez gave O'Connor a 3rd injection of morphine and took another bullet to the leg. Their position was completely surrounded by North Vietnamese soldiers. The situation appeared hopeless, but a helicopter finally arrived for their rescue. Benavidez and the rescue team hauled and dragged the wounded men onto the craft. But the landing zone was still being fired upon by NVA troops to the extent that 2 men were shot in the back as they crawled toward it. Due to earlier shrapnel wounds to his face, Benavidez's vision was blurred by the blood in his eyes. As he went to retrieve Mousseau, an NVA soldier clubbed Benavidez in the head and jaw with a rifle butt and slashed his arm with a bayonet. He screamed for O'Connor to fire, but O'Connor was too drugged from the morphine to react. Benavidez drew his Bowie knife and stabbed the NVA soldier until he was dead. He then dragged Mousseau to the helicopter and neutralized 2 more NVA soldiers with an AK-47 who were outside the door gunner's arc of fire. He made one final trip to recover the interpreter and destroy any classified materials. With blood still obscuring his vision, only then did he allow the others to pull him onto the helicopter, the last man to leave the battlefield. By this point, the round that had struck his stomach had exposed his intestines, which he was attempting to hold in with his bare hands. The helicopter, badly shot up and with no functional instruments left, managed to take flight. When they finally landed, the wounded were unloaded and examined one by one. It turned out that Benavidez had even loaded 3 deceased enemy soldiers into the helicopter in case they carried classified materials. They were cast aside, as was Benavidez. He was unable to move or speak because of his shattered jaw from the rifle butt, and the blood over his eyes had dried, gluing them shut. With 37 separate bayonet, bullet, and shrapnel wounds covering his body, he looked dead. Medics began placing him in a body bag and started zipping it up when a friend noticed him and shouted, "That's Roy! That's Roy Benavidez!" The doctor stated there was nothing more that could be done, but Benavidez mustered his last bit of energy and spat in the doctor's face, causing the doctor to remark, "I think he'll make it." He was flown to Japan for intensive surgery and then to Brooke Army Medical Center at Fort Sam Houston, where he remained for nearly a year. Roy Benavidez had survived 6 hours in hell and saved 8 lives. Benavidez's commander had nominated him for the Distinguished Service Cross because the process for awarding a Medal of Honor would take much longer, and he was unsure if Benavidez would live or die before he could receive it. Finally, on February 24, 1981, President Ronald Reagan presented Roy Benavidez with the Medal of Honor. Reagan remarked that if the story of his heroism were a movie script, you would not believe it. Regarding his actions, Benavidez stated, "The real heroes are the ones who gave their lives for their country. I don't like to be called a hero. I just did what I was trained to do." Master Sergeant Roy Benavidez passed away on November 29, 1998, at the age of 63. If this account of survival against impossible odds has changed the way you view the limits of the human spirit, please subscribe and like the channel. We are unearthing the legends and the history that they tried to bury. Stand with us as we honor the past in Gyo Trong Tong Lai. The next treasure of history will be revealed soon.